Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us. I'm very happy to have you at our Tech Talk today. My name is Dalia, and I'm the community manager here at Kong. We have Stephanie with us today. She's one of our Kong champions, but I will also let her introduce herself and what does she do. We have as a topic today Agentic AI, who needs an API backbone. It's a very interesting topic. We have a very nice presentation prepared for you today, and it's actually being recorded. So you will have access to the recording afterwards. We will send you an email with the recording and some resources. You will also be able to find the recording on our YouTube channel. I will just send you the link in the chat so you have access to it. And yeah, with this, Stephanie, please take it away from here.
All right, thanks, Dahlia. It's great to be here. Uh, so today I am going to share with you my perspective on agentic AI and why it requires an API backbone. My background is actually uh, started in telecom network engineering, and I've had the opportunity to span across a lot of disciplines, including uh, distributed API systems, security teams, building large-scale API ecosystems, data strategies and governance. And currently, I help companies with their strategies to enable solutions. And I also work with some select data platform startups to help them with their product strategies. So I will go ahead and jump right in. I'm excited to walk you through this perspective today. So agentic AI, this is a topic that has rapidly rose to the top of everyone's minds with the uh, big leaps we've made in AI technology in the last year. I would assume, I can't do show of hands here, so I'm just going to be talking, but I would assume that many of you on the call have either been part of or are exploring solutions like RAG models and other more advanced AI. Some interesting stats that caught my eye was a survey recently from KPMG was that 12% of companies are already deploying AI agents, 37% are in pilot stages, and 51% are exploring their use. Gartner reports they're projecting that 33% of enterprise software applications may include some sort of agentic AI by 2033. And that's up from less than 1% last year. So if we think about that, those of us who have been in technology for a long time, we know that paradigm shifts take time. So while 2023 seems far away, now is really the time to start thinking about what is agentic AI, what are our foundations that are required, and how do we position ourselves for success. So I'm going to spend some time today giving you an overview of agentic AI and why now, some of the challenges that you'll face with these implementations, some key factors for success, including discipline, governance, and that strong API backbone, and then some best practices and takeaways. And then I'd love to spend some time hearing your questions, your insights, and your perspective. So AI's evolution. Over the last AI has been around for a very long time. Traditional AI looked a lot like flowcharts and other discrete capabilities. We've seen that evolution through machine learning, deep learning with those neural networks, generative AI, especially in the last year to 18 months. And now we are, for the first time, in a position to really talk about agentic AI, where it can autonomously act and solve business processes for us. So what is agentic AI? I really view this as a paradigm shift. We are going from discretely configuring and programming applications to take actions and interacting with models in a controlled way, asking a question, prompting it, getting an answer back, and then taking that through a discrete set of orchestrated steps. Our aspirational goal is to flip that to where the AI agent can actually do a lot of that for us. So it's no longer discrete flowcharts and code. Rather, it is those AI agents that are building that workflow on the fly. This could look like conversational agents that are triggering a dynamic workflow based on changing landscape. So for example, if this is a logistics platform and all of a sudden something new came into the environment and the AI became aware of it, whether it's a weather event or something else, it may try to make a different decision or go access different information or send that customer to a different place autonomously rather than following a hard-coded flowchart. So why now? I think most of us who have been following kind of the evolution and a lot of the advancements in this area, large language models are proven out. They're accessible, they're becoming somewhat commodity, and there's continued to be a lot of competition in making these really good and really good at certain tasks to the point that we know we can rely on them. Orchestration frameworks for these models have also lowered the barriers, things like LangChain and others. Also demand. Now that we're seeing what's possible, it's almost becoming table stakes to make sure that we're all thinking through from our business standpoint, how do we keep up? How do we stay relevant? How do we make sure that we are positioned to leverage and capture the value from these things that were never possible before? Because if we don't, we run the risk of being left behind. So let's take a little bit to unpack AI and why this is so complicated. So for any of you who have been part of building, deploying, and maintaining systems that use AI, there's a lot that goes into it and it is quite complex. However, there's always that temptation to think of it in as a simple framework as this. When we're looking at, hey, we could use AI for this thing, let's just plug in this model. We send a prompt, we get a response. Done, right? Nothing to it. Well, those of us who have been in the weeds of it know that there's a lot more to it. So really understanding the complexity that goes in is a really key dependency to get started. So the reality when we start talking about agentic systems is they need a complex ecosystem. If we take a minute to think about our daily lives in technology over the last 2, 5, 10, 20 years, the ecosystems, whether you're a cloud native, whether you're a digital native company, whether you're a legacy company, there's going to be different varying degrees of silos and different SaaS products, different business systems. You might be a company who has presences across multiple hyperscalers. You might have some on-prem still. You may use a Salesforce and SAP. When you start thinking about the complexity of manually orchestrating communication between these, and then apply that to what we're really saying with an ultimate, end state vision of agentic AI, awareness of all these systems and the ability to orchestrate that to build into the large language model is going to be key. So when we level set about agentic AI, again, there's lots of dependencies, lots of factors, lots of angles you could look at this. But one of the most important things to think about when you boil it down is AI is only as powerful as the context it has. And the way we share data and get context in our modern architectures are via APIs. If we want to get to truly agentic AI, we have to make that part seamless and frictionless. In order to do that, we need to think about machine readable, scalable consistency. One of the things that I like to look at a lot in my consulting practice is identifying patterns. And I think this is one of those, such an interesting time and such an interesting paradigm, because most of what we're going to talk about here today is identifying those key patterns and then looking for those places to remove friction. And along with this aspirational paradigm shift of getting to this agentic AI, we're also going to kind of walk through a journey of how we are going to think a little bit differently about some of those constraints and opportunities that we have in our current architecture and technology stacks. Oops, did I go backwards? There we go. Oh, was I not on this slide? Sorry about that. This is what we were just talking about a moment ago, but we're going to keep on going. All right. So why is this difficult? Well, again, agentic AI, defining it as truly deploying AI agents that can autonomously discover and build and execute workflows independently, is challenging. One of the key reasons this is challenging is because the APIs we've been building for the last decade were built by humans, assuming that humans were going to be the one hard-coding those into applications and invoking them. They were not built with the assumption that this was going to be an autonomous interaction and needing dynamic capabilities. AI agents are going to need real, consistent, real-time governance. They're also, again, data is going to be a key theme. I think it's been a key theme always, and it's going to continue to be a key theme. They're only as good as the data. And we're also going to be able to need to see what's going on now more than ever. Observability and explainability are absolutely crucial when you're abstracting away some of the discrete logic out of your workflows. So let's take a moment. I really like this slide that Kong has produced because it tells the story just so nicely. So we're going to take a step back and just look at where we've been the last, again, decade or so. For those of us who have been around in the technology world, you can remember those legacy tech stacks. Very discrete, monolithic, transactionally bound. You kind of know what's going on in each component of your stack. And over the course of APIs and the rise of APIs, we're starting to build more and more microservices, which are great because they've enabled a lot of automation, a lot of real-time data sharing, a lot of deep system integration that has eliminated already a lot of human work, which has been a huge benefit and value for a lot of businesses. But the interesting part is if you think about as this moves up, as you're moving into this modern tech stack of really deploying at scale, your service meshes and your different streaming data protocols and API protocols, your control and visibility into what's going on proportionally goes down, which means that if you're busy building these out and scaling and haven't solved for some of the visibility and control things, you may or may not already be experiencing some challenge with that when it comes to just observability, uptime, accuracy. That symptom is only going to be magnified when you start trying to build out agentic AI, because agentic AI needs that next level of governance and discipline baked in as a foundation. So to build on that a little bit more, again, I really appreciated this slide as well because these statistics are so interesting. And I think they're true. And I'll be actually curious to hear from you guys in the comments and Q&A, what your take is, if you agree or not. But, the research they did was that 50% of enterprise APIs will go unmanaged by 2025. So that means that about half of the interfaces that we're using in our systems that are running our businesses today aren't necessarily well understood, well visible. There's not really guardrails around how they're used, which can lead to, even just in our current world, can lead to a lot of issues, right? With errors, inaccuracies, security breaches, et cetera. I think the other really interesting factoid on this slide that's kind of sticking out in my mind as we figure out how do we be successful with agentic AI is every AI is built and deployed differently. So again, if you think back to that previous picture, as we're moving through into these new technologies, and we've, for good reasons, often had siloed organizations that each had their own project schedules, their own set of tools, their own skill sets, people that have really, taken to one platform or another, which can be really great because for a good reason, that might have led to some really fast solutions for some very specific use cases. But the side effect of that now is that variability is the enemy of being able to deploy autonomously because machines need consistency. Machine readable can follow patterns. And if we've got a lot of different patterns, we've got some groundwork to do to normalize across those patterns and make sure we've left our AI in a state where it can autonomously traverse and understand what's going on. So an interesting landscape, an interesting place. The second challenge I want to dive into is governance. So when we're talking about governance, we are talking about the need to enforce. Again, if right now a lot of our APIs are unmanaged, that means that we don't necessarily have programmatic or infrastructure as code or mechanisms to enforce policies along the way around who can access it, data privacy rules, a lot of the authentication authorization that goes into it, which is going to be really important again, because by definition, autonomous agents are going to try to act. And if we're teaching them how to self-discover and make decisions, we need to make sure that they can only access the things and return the data in that situation that are appropriate for that, whoever's at the end of that transaction are supposed to be able to get. There's, lots of examples today where you can find where this could be an issue where perhaps you're making routing requests and an API was silently failing. And so maybe you're just returning empty responses. But right now you're not catching that and just assuming that that meant that things were fine and it went ahead and routed to the wrong places. Okay, this one's always my favorite, and no matter how many years go by, it is always relevant, it seems. The AI decisions are only as good as data. And again, I can't ask for a show of hands, but I would love if you have the comments, does this still resonate with anyone? Because it does with me. As much as we try, as many data strategies and initiatives that we put out, it is hard to move away, especially if you're a legacy organization, from these silos. And when your organization doesn't necessarily yet have API backbone and efficiency and API first coursing through its veins, it makes it really challenging. You can start making progress with some use cases, but you really have to think differently about the why behind some of those initiatives that can standardize your data. I always like, I didn't write it down, so I don't want to get the year wrong, but I always like the story of it was a Jeff Bezos early on as Amazon had sent out a memo to his organization, basically stating you will only communicate with other teams via a service interface. Not only service interface, a well-defined service interface. And he went so far to say one that could be understood and consumed by an external customer tomorrow if that was so required. So we've seen Amazon scale dramatically. And one of those reasons is that early strategy around discipline. They said, yep, it does take longer. Yes, it would be easier if you could just ask for direct access to that database to make that one query. But no, we are not going to do that because our DNA and our discipline is going to focus on we only communicate and share data via API, which is the spec that describes the service interfaces. So it's interesting to think about how those challenges get there and then what you can start doing to mitigate those to get ready to have that data available. All right, observability. We touched on this one as well. This is an area where in isolation, there are lots of things that can be done with use cases. Perhaps there's different teams who are able to see enough about what's going on in different APIs and different applications. And that's fine. But when you start thinking about deploying paradigm shifting agentic AI across some of these solutions that might span multiple teams or multiple silos, your observability is going to become more critical than ever. Understanding those black box decisions. At this point, when you're not going through a discrete workflow that you coded, and you can't go through the logs and see, oh, this is the part that failed. That black box is going to become really important to make sure that you have have thought through what are the use cases that are flowing through it, what are the potential failure points, what are some of the possible implications, and what visibility am I going to need? Um, visibility can also look like understanding what it is that you're calling and what it is that it does. There's been reports of very popular retailers who would have over 30 different APIs just to describe customer profiles. Well, if you don't have observability and visibility into which one of those is being used and what may be some of the implications, constraints, or which one's the master, you can end up with some big problems very quickly. Okay, so we spent a fair amount of time talking about why this is so difficult. So let's flip now and talk about what are some factors that we can set ourselves up for success with agentic AI. And if you look at most any AI technology use case, period, you can boil down the factors for success into these 4 buckets. You need a viable use case, which we'll talk about in a minute, because that's really important to touch on. You need data, right? Data is any use case is going to be only as successful as the data that's available to support it. And then the integration architecture. If you don't have the capabilities to integrate quickly and solve for those constraints we just talked about previously, we're going to have a really hard time building an accurate, successful, deployable solution. And then, of course, the models, which again, that has become very accessible and much more commodity, which is great because it's taken a lot of that work that used to take a lot of time to build and train models off the table for a lot of patterns of use cases. So let's take a minute and talk about what makes a good use case. We said we were going to talk about discipline. This is one area where discipline is key. Discipline is key. I'm going to go over this at a high level, and then we can share this out if it's helpful, and I'm happy to talk about specific examples afterwards if anyone is interested. But when I think about looking for good use cases, you want to really start with some really important questions, like, can this solution actually be integrated into a business process to add value? Is there a way to get this into production? So I'm going to pause on that point. There's a lot of examples of some really well-intentioned, whether it be hyperscalers or other, that come with offers of we will workshop and build this for you for free, which is super awesome. Now, one of the most important things to ask first is, this is great. I would love to do this experiment. This could be paradigm shifting for us. But if it succeeds, what's the path to get it into production? Perhaps it is one of the hyperscalers coming to you, but you don't even yet have a presence there. You're completely in another, and you'd be willing to build out that presence. However, you need to really critically evaluate, what would that take? Do I have a company who has a security posture that is simple to do, or would that maybe take us a really long time? So I think that's really important when you're looking at value of a use case, is to also understand, is there a path to production? What are my other dependencies? And then the other really big thing that I think we're all probably fairly familiar with right now, with all of the focus on RAG implementations over the last year, is not everything is an AI use case. AI solutions are probabilistic by nature. So if you're looking at a deterministic use case, meaning you must get a correct answer within a set of defined answers, you're probably not looking at a good use case for AI. A good example of this is like in the railroad industry, when you have some FRA safety requirements about how you're building a train. You can use AI to help you figure out predictions around what could go wrong on the train, but you're going to need a traditional discrete rules engine to make sure that you are meeting the requirements that have been set out for you. And so that could end up looking like an agentic AI is orchestrating that all, but there are pieces of that still need to have some hard-coded logic. When I think of, so the box here, I'm going to walk you through fairly quickly, but it's a way to think about what you need to be thinking about from a platform and capability standpoint to match your aspirations for getting to a highly integrated, orchestrated, real-time agentic AI system. If your use case is fairly standalone, meaning perhaps it's a compliance validation and you've identified a lot of manual work that someone has to do by building this spreadsheet every month, and you can build a RAG system standalone that has all the intelligence to go pull the updated format every month, populate it with the data from another source, and then produce that report to the human, it's a perfect use case. And that might be something that ends up being part of a larger ecosystem. Those are really good to get started with if you're low on some of the other things we talked about as far as the API capabilities and the data capabilities. But as you want to move up in maturity, either getting much more advanced in that orchestration or much more advanced in your either data requirements or the timeliness of your data requirements, that's where it's going to be really important to be strategically planning out your foundational architectures and enterprise platforms around being able to have observability, data handling, and that API backbone, including a gateway and developer tools. So this is just a framework I like to use when thinking through, what do we want to do, how important it is to the business, what is our order of operations, and how do we plan and budget for the dependencies that are going to be needed to get us there. Okay, so governance. This is always one of those things that I like to touch on because governance can sometimes feel like one of those things that makes us all go, "Ugh, okay." Again, sure, it feels like a lot of people putting things in my way. I have to go ask for permission. You're going to take away data that I need to see to do my job and make it really hard. Here's my argument. If governance is done right, it's always an enabler. Governance, whether you're talking about data governance, model governance, API governance, it boils down to finding the patterns and the key constraints that need to be consistent in order to scale safely and securely. So say that again. We need to identify the places where consistency and visibility is going to enable us to scale faster. So when we're working through governance, always starting with the what are we trying to enable instead of what are we trying to prevent, which can still include security because security is something we are trying to enable through different mechanisms. We are making sure that we can quickly deploy and give access to the data that people need without accidentally exposing sensitive data. All right, the next key foundation beyond governance is the API backbone is essential. I really appreciate this picture that Kong has laid out because I think it tells the story really nicely of how centralizing around a gateway can abstract away a lot of the complexity we talked about. So let's imagine we were trying to build and ultimately get to an automated system with a customer service application. And today there are a lot of discrete applications that can be represented over here on the left that have been built in their own silos. They've chosen their protocols, they've chosen their security, and they all each want to build kind of RAG where they interact with a large language model. When you want to eventually put those all together into more of an agentic system and have an agent being able to broker some of those calls and make automated decisions, the picture on the right is where you need to be in order to make that scale. Because what you've done there is you've standardized across those patterns, you've solved for each of those constraints once in a similar fashion so that agent, again, machines need consistency to be able to autonomously make decisions. All right, hope everyone's still with us here. And sorry, where are we? Okay. Let's flip over. I'm going to wrap up here fairly quickly because I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. For success, we've talked a lot about governance, observability, consistency, the need for an API backbone, the need for good data and governance. We are paradigm shifting here. The key to this is AI agents have to be built safely. The stakes will be great, the reward will be great. There's a lot of just the imagination can run wild, and I'm sure like me, you can get quite excited thinking about a lot of the things that we all do in the daily practice of either IT teams or business teams. That paradigm can completely shift. But some of these key factors around safe autonomy, scalable integration, transparent oversight, and real-time coordination, these are non-negotiable if you want to get to true autonomy, because you need to be able to focus on these in order to truly scale. So if I look at this picture of the Kong ecosystem in particular, the thing that I really like about it is it sort of in one picture sums up most of the things we've been talking about in a way that has provided consistency, provided a single platform, and solved for most of those constraints. It can enable autonomy, integration, that coordination and oversight at scale for that API backbone. Now, there are lots of other platforms out there, and there are some companies who may be in other hyperscalers or cloud native environments. And in certain cases, that might work well. If you are a company who is all in and your whole world is within well contained in one of those, that can be a great solution. And you might have everything you need right there. But if you're a company who perhaps has some systems spanning across hyperscalers or some on-prem, and you also maybe have tight integration with some of your customers or third-party suppliers or others, being able to bring it up a layer and have that cloud agnostic gateway and that uniformity is going to be really essential in order to be able to deploy those AI agents at that level. Now, that's not to say that you have to take everything up to that level, but having that capability that can uniformly communicate and allow you to start building out specific use cases is going to be a really great accelerator. Oops, sorry about that. All right. So let's hit it home here with some best practices. In the opening, I didn't share too much, but in my consulting practice, I really like to focus on two things. Challenging, does it have to be this way? Can we make it happen? And then how do we make that happen fast and well? And so a lot of these best practices that I'm going to share with you are kind of ingrained in my thought process and methodology when I approached architecture in general, but they are especially applicable here today. So one of the key things when you start thinking about a paradigm shift such as agentic AI is be realistic. So what are your constraints? And what I mean by that is know your environment and know what is important to you. If you are a company who knows that the data you handle is the most sensitive thing, that is going to look like a different list of constraints to get started than if you're a company who, there's some tolerance in accuracy. Maybe you're an ad company and your constraint is you must be able to provide the most real-time, accurate recommendations. And that is more important than making sure, that your data is locked down to, very fine-grained access controls. So know your own constraints. Focus on those foundations. So this is so important. This go slow to go fast mentality. Over the last several years, we've seen waves of different, you know, cloud migrations when that became the thing, data strategies when that became the thing, data lakehouses, data mesh, data fabric, API architectures. There's always a new paradigm. And sometimes the temptation is to kind of do a use case and then figure out the rest as you go. With agentic AI and everything we've discussed, that approach just doesn't work. It might for a couple POCs, but if you really want to get to the point where you can scale that and know that you're going to be doing it safely and successfully and securely and accurately, it's a time to slow down. Again, that projection that we heard at the beginning was that by 2033, that a large percentage will be there. I think that reflects this in it, that now is the time to slow down and really think through what are those foundations? What have we been hesitant to invest in that we really need to think about doing right to really get to where we want to go? Which brings me to invest strategically. So when you keep, again, it's patterns. When you keep hitting the same hard problems with your data, every time you've invested in a new value use case, if you're find yourself paying people or SIs to try to do really hard work and it's prolonged, take a hard look. Programmatically solving the problem with a platform or a tool is always going to pay dividends in the long run over investing in piecemeal solutions created by humans. Because when we do it consistently and when we find the platforms that have solved it in a clever way, in a complete comprehensive way, you're taking that variability out. And variability is the friction that can slow these deployments down. And along those lines, free your engineers to focus on the business value. Again, if you're looking at your 2025 and 2026 roadmaps and you're still seeing large dollars on bottlenecks on data engineers and engineers that are trying to manage some of these pieces of your API ecosystem and your data ecosystem, it would be a really great time to take a more strategic look at that and think about, even though sometimes it's hard to prioritize spending, real dollars on those things that seem like just, below the line foundations that no one really understands. What's going to happen is your bell curve on being able to deliver the value and the ROI on a lot of these agentic AI use cases is going to proportionally skyrocket once you've done that. So I would challenge us to, this is now the time to start thinking differently about making those strategic investments and timing them so that you will be set up for that success. All right. So I've put together, and again, I want to just quick disclaimer, there's lots of really great products out there, and a lot of the cloud native tools are perfectly great. They work really well if you are completely cloud native in one of the ecosystems. All of this depends on your use case. But what I've done here is tried to give you an overview of some of the challenges we talked about under the lens of getting to agentic AI, and why they're a problem and how you might think about the solution. And this is where I've called out a few platforms that I tend to recommend because I like their ability to abstract you from that cloud native and really allow you to span across, which is, again, one of the key challenges when we talk about agentic AI. So I'd love to hear from you afterwards too. Your thoughts on these, if there's others that you would think that should be on my radar, questions about any of these, I'd love to chat more. So sorry, I keep doing the wrong. All right. And with that, I would love to take some time to open it up for a little bit of a discussion here. If anyone would like to.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was super, super interesting. And now we have one question in the Q&A. Can you open, do you get access to it?
Yep, I can see now. All right. What is the difference between agentic AI and AI workflows? Great question. So agentic AI can really describe both of those pieces. It's an evolution of getting from um, inserting autonomous decision making inside of workflows. So an early adoption in a stepping stone might look like you have several discrete AI agents that are still orchestrated by traditional applications that have discrete rules and code. When you eventually get to autonomous agentic AI, that's when we're talking about the AI's agents itself building that workflow and that essentially that code to how you invoke APIs and orchestrate and make decisions on the fly. So it's just an evolution of going from controlled environment where you're still controlling the workflows of and the scope of what that agent can do to making that circle of influence bigger where you've given AI control of some of the orchestration. Does that answer it for you?
Yeah, he said, thank you, Stephanie. Makes sense. So any other questions for Stephanie? Go ahead, please ask now. Let's see if we're gonna have any other questions. Please post them in the Q&A so we can keep track there.
And if not questions, I'd love to hear just thoughts on, where have you been part of any AI agent deployment so far? What are you seeing? Different perspectives.
Let's see. Give it a few more minutes for people to type their thoughts. So there's one in the chat.
Yep.
Roll.
Read that. How to conventional designing. Oh, we got examples.
So
Okay.
how is different from conventional designing? How is intelligence coming in?
So It's different from conventional designing because if you are building a traditional application, the nomenclature I used to use at my old job was we call them level ones, but basically you're spending the time up front thinking through for every scenario of how you will interact with this application. What do I need what scenarios and workflows do I need to build? So you would be building out code inside there to say, if this condition, then I call this API. If that condition, then I call this API. So let's take, for example, something like a customer calling to ask where their rail car is. In a conventional application, I'm going to have thought through the questions they're going to ask, what exactly this application can do, and then I will also have thought through how do I tell the human what other system to go to if they need the next information. In the AI intelligence, the premise and where we're headed and where these models are now capable is they can autonomously decide that as they go. So they will basically have awareness that these different APIs and systems exist, but they will be making those decisions and kind of building that workflow on the fly and then learning from it and then course correcting as they go. Does that answer that question? Really would love if I could see y'all guys, but uh, okay. I am going to go ahead on to the next one. Um, Yep, some other examples of probabilistic versus deterministic use cases. So I think one of the examples I'd given was around like FRA rules. That's probably an important one. So anything, if it's like an regulatory landscape where you are required to stay within certain limits. So um, maybe I can think of one in, let's say um, it's an insurance field, and there are certain regulations that insurance providers need to follow as far as limits or who they are going to cover. Those things would be deterministic because your AI can't come up with an answer that is outside the bounds of what the regulation says. But if you're trying to optimize your ability to, um, maybe make, control your costs, you can have a probabilistic AI solution looking at those and helping fine tune where you land or what you recommend based on all the factors, and it continuously be learning to make sure that every time you are responding, that you're doing it in the most cost-effective way, but you're still going to need some sort of deterministic guardrail to make sure that that answer is still within where the regulation puts you. All right. See, Clifford, I hope that answered your question. Um, so Raul, your question about where this awareness will reside. So if you're asking about the awareness of the ecosystem, so yes, the model itself will be trained on the type of work that it is trying to do, just like you would train a RAG solution today to understand uh, the data and the subject matter. Oftentimes, how this is done today is through building what's called semantic models, where you've maybe taken and pointed to a set of curated data sets, and then you've given that a semantic model, which basically maps what's in all of that data with synonyms and ways to describe it so that the AI can take the natural language and interpret that and go find the data in the right place. So we're just evolving from that model into an awareness of an API catalog or other factors around the environment that allow it to take those actions autonomously. All right, what about API evolution and changes? How does autonomous agentic AI update its code to support new versions of the API? These are awesome questions that are definitely going to need to be solved. I um, don't have a great answer on like exactly how off the top of my head for you. But that is an interesting one to definitely follow up on and look at how that will. I mean, I can speculate that there's different ways you could handle this, uh, depending on how you build out your architecture underneath. The goal would be to try to abstract that away so that there's not breaking changes. Um, but there's a lot of different approaches you can take here. Uh, because if you think about it from an evolution standpoint of don't break, introduce new, then you can train it to always be finding the most recent, and you kind of eliminate some of those constraints that you're used to dealing with today. That concept of technical debt can be handled in a lot of different ways. Um, but that's a great question. That's going to be a really interesting one to kind of see unfold. In that case, we are creating scenarios in the model as against conventional design. Hmm. Rahul, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that follow-up question just to make sure I understand what you're asking, if that's okay. Did I miss any or did I get them all so far?
I think everyone, let me see. Wait,
Yeah,
Baghdad,
there's
can
one.
you hear us?
Yeah. Hey,
Hey, Baghdad.
hey, Stephanie.
Oh, good.
I'm with Kong as well. So I was more gonna kind of put some insights into what we're seeing and also add some context. I think the question was the last one was how does autonomous agentic AI update its code to support new versions of the API? It's actually not updating its code. You give access to essentially when you build an agent, it has access to tools. Those tools can be APIs, documents, data stores, whatever it needs access to. And the analogy I like is like a butler. An agent is a butler that you say, hey, go make me coffee. Well, the agent is intelligent enough to know, okay, I have to go to the coffee maker. I have to get coffee beans, grind them, get a cup, put the cup under it, make the coffee, and then bring the coffee back. It knows it has to get the coffee maker, cup, and coffee beans, and those are the tools it needs. Now, in your question on versioning, it might decide, hey, I have this nice coffee maker and I have a Keurig, which is faster. And he might have said, one morning I'll say, get me coffee fast. It'll decide which version is best for that solution because it knows well enough the differences. And it could also talk to an agent that controls versioning and is telling it, hey, this is the new version based on that request. So semantically, whatever request comes in, it'll tell it what version to go to. What we're really seeing, and we will see, I think in 2025, the conversations we're having is if 2024 was the year of AI, 2025 is going to be the AI year of agentic AI and agents. And that means there's going to be an explosion of these agents. And so where we see a lot of the conversations isn't, hey, how do I deploy this one use case? And what is the value with, RAG or agent workflow or this or that? We're having conversations about how do I build an agentic AI platform. So the entire platform to kind of let my developers and engineers experiment and decide where they go, and to Stephanie's point, with those guardrails up. So you can go in and you can start experimenting with the agent, building what you need to, and seeing if it's fairly accurate in its outcomes, seeing if it needs different models. Hey, use DeepSeek here versus OpenAI versus Minstrel or Anthropic, depending on which use case you have. You want to be able to shift those. The same is true for agents when they're talking to each other and trying to get the task complete. They will decide which models to use, which tools they have access to and not. What our job is to put up those guardrails and say, well, I don't know, maybe we scrub PII data. Maybe we remove access to these important data stores that this department doesn't need access to, and therefore its agent doesn't need access to those. And so we're more of building the guardrails and the platform for that at that point, using technologies like Kong and the model, and various agentic orchestration tools that are out there. LagChain comes to mind and things of that nature. So all those kind of work together to provide a solution where you have an AI platform at that point to build whatever you want. You want to build a conventional use case where it's just doing deterministics, fair enough. If you want to do probabilistic, that's available as well. That gives the developers, the ability to innovate. So those is just some, hopefully that answers some questions, and I see more chatter, so I think more questions are coming up as well.
Thanks. I really like that analogy with the coffee maker. That's a great one.
Yeah, no worries.
Awesome insight.
I think we have one last questions I saw. Do you reach, and Stephanie, this might be for you, a situation where instead of providing APIs, we are providing API agents, which will work with consumer agents? Well, when you look at, to me, and Stephanie, you can correct me if you see it differently, but to me, agents and when you say AI, they're just front-ended with APIs. So I'm consuming APIs, or if I build my own model and give agents access to that model, I'm exposing it via APIs. So when I say, hey, customer XYZ, you now have access to an agent that I'm in insurance. This agent will quickly find the best rates given certain parameters, if you fill out a form on my website, whatever. Just a very simple use case. Well, I'm not, that agent now has access to my APIs. And when I say I'm giving you access to that agent, in essence, I'm giving you access to those backend APIs as well. So having that foundational strong API, like a secure API model, is paramount to the success of AI and agentic AI.
Absolutely. There was still a question over in the Q&A that I don't know that we answered yet, so I'll flip to that one for a sec. There's a question about how can we achieve scalability of agentic AI? And I think that's a great opportunity to sum up. It is through the discipline and governance and having that API backbone. So everything that I just shared about exposing these AI models is via API. And when you have the tools for your developers to do that quickly and have baked in all of the parts that are essential for scaling success, that's when you're able to scale and move quickly. So I can give a quick example of just to kind of hammer that point home. I was part of a big initiative early on at the railroad where we were getting off of a mainframe monolith by building a massive distributed service-oriented architecture, which started with the idea of we're going to have some core principles such as we will not make direct database calls. So no direct DAO connections. All of our applications must be abstracted by API. And early on, that was really important to think through. What is the naming convention going to be? What is the service domains? What are our norms and practices and governance? Because if we started just building, we wouldn't have been able to scale because people wouldn't be able to discover what APIs existed. We'd end up with duplicates. There's lots of things that go into it. Those same principles are what are going to be even more essential now when you look to scale agentic AI, because what you're essentially doing is that same exercise, but also bolting on a lot of the other concerns with AI that we talked about there. So governance, consistency, identifying your patterns, and investing in those tools and platforms that can do and abstract away a lot of that for you is going to be your best bet for scaling quickly.
Okay, Stephanie, let's see if we have any last questions. We have just 4 minutes left, so anyone, any last questions, please put them in the Q&A or in the chat. Do we
I
answer
see
anything?
one about providing API agents via frameworks. Do we need to provide agents for all our APIs or all these agentic frameworks? So architecturally, the principle is you're going to be utilizing your APIs and exposing them to whichever agents need them in whatever fashion you want. Now, someone else might be building that agent, might be utilizing that agent, So, what is the best practice is to first secure and ensure scalability and governance for the APIs. And then when you go in and say, hey, I have my APIs here that I know agents are going to need access to, now you can control which teams and the agents they're building have access to which APIs. So if you expose them, for example, to a framework and someone has access to that orchestration tool and they try to access an API, well, you've already set the guardrails to that API. So if they are not supposed to have access to that data and that API, that request will fail. So starting at the API layer is always, I think, foundational because that's how you're essentially building on top of it. You're building on top of it all these agent and AI use cases. So starting there, making sure you have a good governance, observability model to the presentation here, making sure you have secure, whether it's auth and auth Z policies, MTLS, whatever it is, making sure you have that in place. Then when you build the AI agents on top of it, you're already ensuring that same security carries through.
Thank you for that. Okay, one last question in the Q&A, and then we need to wrap up. So, from Prem. Stephanie, do you see it?
Oh, this was in the Q&A. No, I was looking at the chat. Here we go. Improve the efficient. How is agentic AI going to improve the efficiency of infrastructure in cloud on-prem? Well, there's lots of ways you can think about this. One of the big opportunities is again taking a look at the consistency patterns and what you need to be able to scale. But AI, there's every platform provider out there is right now looking at how they can leverage AI models inside their business. And so if their core business as a platform provider is providing that infrastructure as code and that service, I would imagine that just like everyone else in their business, they're looking at where can I add efficiencies? Where can I optimize? Where can I use AI to scale things that are currently hard? But they're going to be grappling with all of the same problems that we just discussed here today of doing that securely, safely. So that's one angle is using it to enhance the efficiency of those platforms that you build on top of. But then also the way you manage, interact. I mean, you think about tools like copilots inside CodeGen, infrastructure as code, being able to automate away. Things like in your data pipelines, there's new tools popping up all the time. There's a new Snowflake native tool called Data Pancake, which is basically abstracting away a lot of the work you used to have to do to build that pipeline to take semi-structured data out of an API call and structure it. So I think there's multiple layers to that question. And it's pretty exciting, the opportunity really, when done correctly and safely. I think it's going to be a pretty interesting couple of years. But I'd be curious if you had anything to add on that one too, just your perspective.
I think you covered it very well. My view and where I work is mostly we end up seeing a lot in the API world. We have like the same thing we had in the infrastructure days, which was the same thing we had before in the hardware days. Server sprawl became VM sprawl, became container sprawl, and now we're seeing API sprawl. My view is that the next wave is going to be agent sprawl. So how the first wave of that is always, hey, what does orchestration and an AI agent platform and AI platform look like? And then after that is, how do I look at this from cost-cutting concerns? And we're already having a lot of those conversations around things like semantic caching. So I don't have to constantly make requests of the LLM API, which costs me money, right? Because I'm paying either a public provider or I'm using my own infrastructure for that. So if I can cache it and then respond to similar requests that are semantically similar, that can save me 95% of cost to my model. So those are kind of where we see the next wave is, hey, if you're going to have a explosion of AI utilization, we need to get in front of that observability, cost control scenarios. So you're building correctly. And then obviously, as we mentioned earlier, and throughout this conversation, it has to be secure, scalable, and reliable. So those everything that we talk about in API land translates over, and then on top of that, we add the ability to do cost control and further an analytics. So that's kind of where we see it going. With agents, it's just more so. Whereas, hey, I had I had a use case the other day. I had a colleague that built out an agents that are an agent for a document. So that means that instead of for any kind of document, you could talk to the document. So if you have a legal document of all the laws in the United States, and you build an agent, which is just a model that can query that document, you can now talk to that document and give it scenarios. Hey, what happens if I accidentally leak X type of data? If I accidentally leak, personal data of my users, it'll query that document and respond in real time. Hey, this is the repercussions of that. Same thing we are seeing with other scenarios, but still a document agent. And that's just one use case, but you can imagine all the different BUs and all the different users, how they could have their own personal document agent. And that's what our engineers, our customers' engineers are being asked to build is, hey, on the fly, what's the fastest way for me to get this up and running? And how do I do that again with security and scalability and reliability in mind? That falls to technologies like Kong to help them build.
Thank you. Well, let's see. Do we have any last questions before we wrap up? I think we have one more. Oh, no, this is just, oh, great session. Thank you, Prem. And thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Stephanie, so much for the great presentation. Really amazing. And thank you, Baghdad, for joining and helping with the questions. Also very much appreciated. For everyone that asked, this was recorded. You will receive an email with the recording and some additional resources. You will also be able to find the recording on our YouTube channel. You can see the link in the chat. I included it there. Yeah. Anything else, Stephanie, Baghdad, before we wrap up?
Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun and happy to have follow-up conversations. Reach out to me on LinkedIn or on my website and have a great one. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Same, definitely reach out. We're always interested in what you guys are thinking up and how you what you foresee coming down the line, and happy to be on. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. Thank you, Baghdad. And so everyone can reach out to us also on the community Slack, which is concommunity.slack.com. So you can send questions there, comments, discussions, anything, and we will follow up with you. So with that, I'm wrapping up. Have a great day. Have a great evening, wherever you're based, and I will see you next time at our next User Co and Tech Talk. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.